Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that is honestly just as messy and deeply emotional as it is mathematically flawless. We're looking at a guy whose life was completely defied by chaos, yet who literally dreamed of absolute, perfect, mechanical logic. We're talking about Charles Babbage, the bitter father of computing.
Just look at the screen you're using to watch this explainer. Right now, you are holding an absolute miracle of modern engineering. But here's the wild truth. Without the deeply flawed, furious 19th century guy we're discussing today, there's no internet, there's no modern devices, literally just silence and the scratch of a quill on paper. He died totally convinced the world had conspired against him, but he essentially designed the modern world.
Okay, let's jump into the timeline and see where this whole thing started. Born in London back in 1791, Babbage was the kind of kid who just made adults incredibly uncomfortable. You know the type. To him, understanding something meant literally tearing it to pieces. He'd compulsively disassemble clocks and mechanical dolls just to figure out the guts of the mechanism. Fast forward to when he arrives at Cambridge University in 1810, he is totally shocked to find their mathematics was decades out of date. So what's he do? Well, by 1812, he co-founds the Analytical Society to aggressively drag British math kicking and screaming into the modern age. Because he wasn't interested in being liked, you guys. He was just interested in being right.
Now, you got to understand the stakes here. In the 1820s, navigation was a literal life-or-death problem. Mathematical tables used by engineers, astronomers, and ship navigators were all computed by hand, by humans. Human computers, as they called them. And humans make mistakes. If you're navigating a massive ship in the pitch black using a math table riddled with errors, those mistakes could literally kill you. So for Babbage, making the leap from human error to mechanical perfection, it wasn't just some fun mathematical puzzle. It was an absolute necessity for survival.
There's this moment in 1821 where he's sitting with his friend John Herschel, hunting through these terrible error-ridden tables, and Babbage just blurts out, "I wish to God these calculations had been executed by steam." Now that sounds like a throwaway line of frustration, right? Like something you just mutter under your breath. But for a guy like Babbage, who literally never let anything go, that singular thought just lodged in his brain. It birthed a total, all-consuming obsession, completely eliminating the human element.
And that obsession morphed into his first grand vision, the difference engine. This wasn't just a calculator, oh no, it was a mechanical behemoth designed to automatically compute and print perfect mathematical tables accurate to 20 decimal places. 20! But here's the catch. He and his master engineer, Joseph Clement, they couldn't just build the thing. They actually had to invent entirely new precision engineering tools just to machine the parts to tolerances that had literally never been achieved before. Naturally, bringing this absolute behemoth to life required an unprecedented amount of cash. In 1823, the British government gave him an initial grant. Over the next decade, they poured what would eventually total £17,000 into this project. Think about that. This was history's very first government computing grant, and honestly, nobody really knew what they had just bought as the costs just kept climbing and climbing. To really put that number into perspective, that £17,000 was roughly the equivalent of building 2 mighty Royal Navy warships. 2 warships! And what did the government actually have to show for it? No working engine. Nope, just massive piles of drawings, scattered shiny components, and the increasingly erratic reports of an obsessive genius who just could not stop moving the goalposts.
Which brings us to Babbage's fatal flaw, crippling perfectionism. While the government is tapping its foot, waiting for their incredibly expensive difference engine, Babbage suddenly comes up with a better idea around 1833. Actually, let's call it a completely different idea. He abandons the funded project to dream up something called the Analytical Engine. He's no longer thinking about computing specific equations. This was a vision for a general-purpose, fully programmable mechanical computer.
And the true tragedy here is how perfectly he mapped the future. He conceived of the exact architecture of the device you are watching this explainer on right now. But he did it in the 1830s. Look at this. He designed a memory unit which he called the store. He designed a processor, calling it the mill. And he designed a whole system of input and programming using punched cards. He literally mapped out the entire anatomy of modern computing more than a century before it even existed. But, as we all know, pure vision doesn't pay the bills. By 1842, having seen zero return on their massive warship-sized investment, the government had officially had enough. Prime Minister Robert Peel completely pulled the plug on all funding. The difference engine was formally canceled, and the due Analytical Engine, zero support. Babbage was furious, absolutely livid, and it was a deeply seated rage that he would carry with him for the rest of his life.
Amidst all this frenzy and frustration, though, he does meet someone who actually matches his intensity. Augusta Ada King, Countess of Lovelace. She was the daughter of the Romantic poet Lord Byron, and she possessed an incredibly rigorous mathematical discipline. When she first met Babbage in 1833, she was just 17 years old. But while everyone else just saw a curious novelty in his gears, she saw the profound potential inside the machine. Babbage absolutely adored her, famously calling her the Enchantress of Numbers.
Their legendary collaboration went down in a few distinct phases. First, Ada translates an article about the engine. Then, she adds her own extensive notes that ended up being 3 times longer than the original text. And finally, she writes what is widely considered the very first machine algorithm, specifically a method for computing Bernoulli numbers. Tragically, she passed away at just 36 from cancer, leaving Babbage to grieve her loss for decades.
Now, on a daily basis, Babbage really struggled to manage his own genius. Get this, he sincerely believed that a full 25% of his working capacity was being actively destroyed by organ grinders and street bands outside his window. Literally, a quarter of his brainpower, gone. He waged this unhinged, all-out war against street musicians. He tracked statistics on them, he lobbied Parliament, he had them arrested, and in response, they purposely gathered outside his house to annoy him even more. It's hilarious, but also kind of sad.
And the street musicians were really just the tip of the iceberg. Babbage simply could not ignore foolishness or inefficiency anywhere he saw it. Just look at this staggering array of side quests. He fought the British railway system over their track gauges. He published a vicious pamphlet naming and shaming the Royal Academy of Sciences. He ran for Parliament twice, and obviously lost both times. Oh, and in his spare time, he invented the train black box, designed the locomotive cowcatcher, and even invented the ophthalmoscope. His mind was just this non-stop explosion of restless, chaotic brilliance. Sadly, that chaotic brilliance ultimately left him completely isolated. On October 18, 1871, Charles Babbage died at 79 years old. He passed away in a house overflowing with drawings and unfinished components, totally broke and deeply bitter. The industrial world he helped theorize had simply roared past him. The London Times gave him an incredibly unenthusiastic obituary, and his life's greatest work just seemed destined to gather dust in the archives of failure.
But hold on a second. The story does not end in 1871. Fast forward with me to the year 1991. The Science Museum in London decides to do something truly monumental. They took Babbage's later designs for Difference Engine number 2, and they decided to attempt to actually build it. And guys, this is where Babbage gets his ultimate undeniable vindication. Using only the tools, tolerances, and materials that would have been available to him back in the 19th century, they built the machine. And you know what? It worked perfectly. Every single calculation it performed was absolutely correct. Babbage wasn't crazy. He wasn't unhinged. He was absolutely right. He was just blocked by money, politics, and a world that simply couldn't understand him yet.
Just consider the staggering gap in history here. Babbage conceived of a fully programmable computer in 1833. The first electronic computer wasn't built until 1943. He was exactly 110 years ahead of human progress. The memory, the processor, sequential programming, all of those core principles were laid down by Charles Babbage a full century before humanity caught up. It's mind-blowing.
So, the next time you unlock your phone or fire up your laptop, remember the infuriating, combative, exhausted Victorian genius who made it all possible. Which leaves us with this thought. If a bitter 19th century guy could design the architecture of our modern digital world using nothing but cogs, steam, and sheer obsession, what impossible ideas are being drawn up in some messy room right now? Keep learning, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next explainer.